Hello there, sword friends. I am going to do a video about what sword you should buy. It's the most common question I get asked kind of in private messages or in commentary on YouTube. Tens of people have asked me due to my overwhelming popularity. Maybe a little bit more than tens, but honestly not that much more. I thought it was really relevant for me to make a video about what sword you should buy, because what sword is the best for this much money? What sword should I buy? I do this or that or the other with it. And there's a lot of questions that relate to what the best sword is, and the frank answer is there really isn't one best sword, but there are a lot of things that can help you ask yourself that will inevitably point you in the right direction for what is the right one for you. The simple thing is, as I mentioned, there just isn't one best sword, and there's a lot of considerations that you need to make as a buyer that will help you figure out, what the right thing is for you specifically. So, without further ado, just keep in mind a couple things. One, this video is going to be wildly unedited. I don't plan on doing a whole lot of stuff, so it's going to be very rambly and probably quite long. And two, it's made in the frame of Japanese swords primarily. That is my focus and interest, and where most of my knowledge resides, little as it may be. So I think it's applicable to European-style swords or Filipino-style swords, or really any type of bladed weapon out there. But it is going to be put kind of in the frame of mind of Japanese-style swords. So take that with a grain of salt, and here I go. What's the best sword? Well, there's a lot of questions that you might need to ask yourself. One, how long does it need to be? What martial art are you practicing? Are there any kind of specifications for your particular martial art? What are you going to be cutting? Are there any particular steels that you need to use? Are there aesthetics or properties that you like about the sword? What's your budget? There's just a ton of questions that come up in terms of what makes the right sword for you specifically. And more than that, even then, you might not like it. That's what happened to me. It took a lot of handling other swords to figure out what I liked, but to hopefully gain some knowledge from my experience, I hope to convey onto you at least some important considerations that will make a dent in narrowing down your selection. Now, before I go into that, the thing that I want to point out is maybe demystifying some of the important things that you're going to see in the market. And there's three main categories of Japanese-style swords that you're going to see, or just about any kind of swords. You have mass-produced swords, one. Mass-produced swords, it's important that I clarify this because you can get custom mass-produced swords where you can go and select the style and the blade profile, and they say it's custom, but it's not really custom. But you have custom antiques and mass-produced blades. And when I say mass-produced blades, what I mean is they're usually making them in batches. Maybe they heat treat them in batches. There's often things that are done to cut the cost so that you can buy a sword at a very inexpensive price point, and things like that often can affect quality. So take, for example, the handle. The handle might be made by somebody that never saw the blade, and to fit it on, they might just whack it on with a hammer that cracks the handle and makes it a danger to use. Or maybe when they're heat treating them, they do it in batches, and nobody ever gets to hear if there's a ping or a ting or some indication that the blade is got a crack or a fatal flaw in it that could impact you as a practitioner or make it a danger to use. It can be a bit of a crapshoot with mass-produced blades, but statistically, you're generally speaking okay. I haven't had too many blades break, but they have broken on me. So it's important to note that mass-produced blades lack the attention to detail very often that you get from an individual smith making one blade at a time. The thing that you get with a custom sword or antique is that usually one person held the blade and thought about how it should feel in your hand and tried to make it suitable for use, whether that be in the shape it had, the balance it had, also the attention to detail, where one person was heat treating it at a time and they got to hear any tangible feedback that would indicate that there was a problem in that process. So then you have antiques. Custom, one person making it at a time. Antiques are historic blades. That doesn't necessarily mean you're talking about like something from the 11th century. There's antiques that are from World War II, perfectly suitable to use, just fine, and there's so many of them that you're not risking diminishing or breaking some important part of history. There are really, really old blades that you can get at a pretty modest price in the Japanese sword realm that are suitable for iaido or practice drawing, and there are other blades that are perfectly fine to be used for even cutting. There are historic antiques that are on the market, and priced, in the same general price category as some of the higher end mass-produced blades. So it's important to note that they are available to you as somebody that might be considering buying a blade. And those are the three general categories. There are, of course, cross between, say, modern Japanese smiths producing swords today. That would be a Shinsakudo or a modern kind of Japanese custom blade, but I'm lumping those in with just the general custom blades made inside and outside of Japan. If you're a stickler or a collector of Nihonto, you're probably not going to like that statement, but any modern blade with modern koshirai, modern mounting, that's got the level of attention to detail for one person making it at one time in a modern context, I'm kind of lumping in with custom blades. And though chances are if you're watching this video, you're really probably looking more towards the mass-produced line of things, it's just important for me to note that those other categories exist. So now I'm going to try and demystify some of the things that you're going to see in the Japanese sword realm buying market, the things that you're going to see and why they're important. So the first thing that you're going to see is just a host of steel types. You're going to see just a grip of different things that the blade can be made out of. 1045, 1050, 1060, 1075, 1086, 1090, 1095, W1, W2, 5160, 6150, Orishigane, Tamahagane, this, that, and the other. And realistically, all of those are perfectly fine sword steels. The one you want to look out for is stainless steel, 440, 440C, 440S. Those are indications of stainless steel, which is not generally suitable for a katana that you intend to use, as in whack things with and hope that they die and such. So look out for that one, but otherwise all of the other materials can make a good sword. Some are better than others. There are pros and cons to each. The main thing that you want to really know is that the heat treatment, all of those steels by themselves really are, a bunch of bullshit. They don't really do anything in particular by themselves. It's the heat treatment and the smith that unlock all of that amazing potential in that steel. And if that smith does not know what they're doing with that steel, it doesn't end up giving you any of that amazingness. You can't buy a sword and look at the steel as a specification the same way you do, say, a computer or a camera or a car or something like that. It doesn't mean that, if I buy something that's got this many gigahertz, that it's better than something with that many gigahertz. It doesn't work that way. If you have a 1045 sword, something that's generally known as the less expensive, softer, maybe not the best steel for making swords, something that's more on the cost-effective side and easy to work with side, and then contrast it with something like, L6 steel, which is hard to work with and can make really resilient, amazing swords. Howard Clark works with that. It's supposed to be really cool stuff, right? Well, if somebody doesn't heat treat that L6 steel right, it's not really a great sword. It doesn't hold an edge. It can bend really easy. It can get fucked up. Can you hear me? No. Okay, I'm safe. So it can get messed up really, really, really easily, and that is not a good sword. And I would rather have a inexpensive, well heat-treated blade from a very simple steel than some sort of super steel that was improperly heat treated. And there's a lot of different steels out there. Ultimately, I don't really put a lot of stock in what type of steel it's made from. If it's done by a company that knows how to work with it, then maybe so. But ultimately, if you're looking for mass-produced blades in China, 1045, 1060, and 1095 seem to be the blades or the steels that they're most comfortable working with, that you're more likely to get a good result out of. Now, that doesn't mean that you can't get a good result out of other things, but it does seem like they really have a lot of experience with those three steels for whatever reason. If you're dealing with a custom smith or somebody that's making a specific sword for you and that you've commissioned to make a blade, and they are an individual smith with some reputation, chances are they're going to know how to work with the particular type of steel that they are working with. Or if they don't, they're going to learn how to do it before you end up getting it, and you're going to get a satisfactory blade back. The next thing that you hear about swords is geometry. There's a lot of different styles of geometry. That might be shinogi zakuri, shobu zakuri, moroha zakuri, all sorts of different zakuris, and ultimately those distinguish between the tip. But what you're going to see is different tips, different widths, girths, and ultimately those are going to be dedicated toward different purposes. You're going to see swords that have a thinner, more lively construction. Maybe they're made to be your iaito or something that is more lively and easy to work with and isn't going to strain your wrists if you're doing thousands of repetitions of drawing and sheathing the sword. Likewise, you have big, wide, fat swords that are intended to cut grass or cut tatami mats or cut bamboo stalks. And they're going to be much wider, much heavier, much thicker, and they have different purposes. So keep in mind that those geometries are going to be useful based on what you're doing with the sword. Some of them are thick and heavy and still don't look like tatami cutters, and those are maybe more historic battlefield pieces. There's a wide variety of thin, lively blades, big, thick, heavy blades, and everything in between. The next thing that you're going to see is folded steel and laminated steel. Folded and laminated steel are two different things. Now, folded steel just means that you have a type of steel, maybe a different type of steel, maybe the same steel, and it is folded over one over the other. My hand gesture probably isn't doing it, and what you end up getting is a really active pattern on the surface of the steel that gives you some sort of contrast, some artistic quality that is really pleasant to look at, but it doesn't make it stronger or faster or better or sharper. Those things don't happen. In fact, it's an opportunity to introduce imperfections and impurities into the steel, so debatably it's worse than just a mono steel or a pure steel or an unfolded steel, if you will. Historically, there are reasons that they folded steel. Those reasons really don't exist anymore. So, well, they do it now for artistic reasons because it looks cool. If that's important to you, then great. It's important to me. I like the look of a folded steel, but it does not inherently make it anything better. It's more cumbersome and time intensive to do, though. That's why you pay more for it. So keep in mind that it's not going to really performance enhance your sword anymore. So when you're looking at like maybe this sword is way more expensive than the other one, if it's folded, you may be paying a premium for that. Lamination is another thing that you're going to see. Now, lamination is a little bit different. That means that you might have some folded steel or maybe a pure steel, but then you have something with a higher carbon content and a lower carbon content, and they're going to be mushed together. So you have the lower carbon content stuff, say, on the outside, and the higher carbon content stuff on the inside. And that means that your edge is going to come out and you're going to have a perhaps higher carbon content steel on the edge and a lower carbon content steel on the outside, and that's going to give you better edge retention and more flexibility. The benefit of less carbon is it's a little more flexible. The benefit of higher carbon is it holds an edge better. All stuff that's related to swordsmithing, and I am not a swordsmith. The point is that lamination can, one, have an aesthetic appeal where you can see the lamination line and it's very aesthetically appealing, at least in my personal opinion. But also you have the benefit of a mixture of steels, or not a mixture, but different steels in different locations on the blade based on performance characteristics, which may result in a better performing sword. There's some argument about whether or it does or doesn't, or whether it's applicable in certain price categories, which is honestly something you need to watch out for. A lot of basic companies say you get a really awesome laminated blade for $200, and it's not. So there are some marketing gimmicks out there that and false advertising. But in a historic context, in Japanese swords, they were often laminated, where you had different steels at different parts of the blade. The back was softer, the edge was harder, and that gave you a better performing sword. Is it important now? No, not really. I mean, I've used some mono steel blades that don't have any type of lamination technique, and they work great. I don't think it's necessary, but I'll admit that there is some arguable idea whether it can be a performance enhancement or not. Just note that it's an option that's available. It's not mutually exclusive to folding. You can have a folded and laminated blade, or you can have laminated and not folded. For example, the Ronin Elite swords are a laminated construction, but they're not folded. And there's a lot of other folded blades. The Hanwei blades are folded, but not laminated. And then you have stuff like the Taisuki Nihonto that is folded and laminated if you talk about their Sanmai series. And ultimately, that is just a construction of different steels in different places, not necessarily related to folded, but more location of the steel as a performance enhancement to the sword that gives it certain properties. The last bit that you have with Japanese swords is the hardening technique. You have differential hardening and you have through hardening. Through hardening, if I'm speaking in broad generals, is going to give you a more shock resistant blade, something that you're going to be able to whack into things have bad cuts with, and it will maintain its shape and probably not break or chip or something, but return to its shape. But at the same time, does not hold an edge as well. You can still put an edge on it. It still stays very sharp. They're still very good, but it will not hold as keen an edge for as long as a differentially hardened blade. A differentially hardened blade gives you a keener edge for longer because the edge is a bit harder. You also get a hamon. Differential hardening is what gives you that kind of wavy line along the Japanese blade, which aesthetically is very pleasing, but at the same time doesn't necessarily make it better. There are two different styles of making a sword. I'd say for beginners, a through hardened blade is not necessarily a bad idea. A differentially hardened blade isn't necessarily a recipe for disaster, but at the same time, it has some things that are less forgiving to newer practitioners. So hopefully that demystifies some of the stuff that you're going to see in a sword and breaks down some basic characteristics about stuff you see on the internet. Now I'm going to go into the types of people that I see buying swords and what I think is important to them. And again, just my opinion. You have 4 categories of people in general that I see that buy swords. So one is a martial artist. A martial artist is somebody that's studying under a particular martial art, and that martial art is often going to have requirements for the tool that you're learning to use. Very often the martial arts are based on a period in time, and that period in time you use this particular tool, and you are using that particular tool to study the martial art, and they go hand in hand. That means that there's going to be some special requirements for that tool, and you usually have a little bit more rigid a specification for what you need to study that martial art. Now that doesn't mean you need to study a martial art to buy a sword. Hell, buy as many as you want. They're awesome. They make great decorations. They're fun as hell to chop stuff up with in the backyard. And that's really the second category. Somebody that intends to use the sword but isn't studying necessarily a martial art. You want to cut stuff up, whether it be self-guided practice or whether it just be for fun in the backyard, but you intend to use it with some regularity, but not under the guise or instruction of any particular martial art or sensei or teacher or system of martial arts. Then you have collectors. Collectors are folks that are going to buy the sword for a variety of different reasons. It's hard for me to say. Collectors collect things for all sorts of reasons. It might be an investment, it might be because it looks cool, but the basic reason is that you're buying many different ones. You're using them for whatever the hell you're going to use them for, but it's not necessarily for use. You're buying it for aesthetic properties, you're buying it for investment reasons, you're buying it for whatever reason you really want to buy it for. It's your damn money. But the main point is it's not necessarily for use. It's going to sit there, and so I have some advice for you on that. And the last thing is, the last group of people that I see are the kind of, oh crap, zombie apocalypse or home defense, or I want it maybe for decoration, maybe because I just want one, maybe because they're really awesome, but if I need to use it, it damn well better work. I want it to be battle tested, I want it to be the best, I want it to be really good at doing its intended purpose, which is just messing stuff up. And so you have that kind of using it almost as an oh shit button. Can you hear me? No. Okay, safe. Oh shit button. So first off, martial arts practitioners. The main thing I can give you advice on is, one, ask your sensei, look for your school's instructional manuals. Very often you have schools that will be very specific about the materials and tools that you need to have. And that's important because if you buy a sword and you can't use it, it sucks to spend a bunch of money on a tool that you then can't use in your school. They might have specifications on how long it needs to be, where you need to buy it, what company it needs to be from, how long the handle is, how long the blade is, how long it is based on how big you are. It might have to have special symbols on it, or a special guard on it, or special somethings. There's a lot of different reasons, but ultimately your school, the martial arts system that you study, if they have some outline as to what you should get, look to them first. Now, if they don't, very often they will have a sizing chart at least that says, for this martial art, the sword should be XYZ based on your size. Use that as well, because some martial arts use a much longer handle or a much shorter handle, or a longer blade or a shorter blade, and it's going to be helpful. You're learning specific moves and how to do specific things that are intended for generally a sort of a specific shape based on a point in history. use that as a guide to figure out how long or short the sword should be. That's going to really help you figure out what you should be buying. If you don't even have that, then figure out how long a sword you want personally. If it's not set in stone by somebody else or by a system of martial arts, take a bowkin, take a stick, take a broom handle in your closet and chop it down until you get approximately the size sword that you feel comfortable with using. It needs to be the right size, because if you're studying a martial art, a good portion of that martial art is going to be drawing the sword, and you need to learn how to move your hips and your hands and the saya and all of these things in unison to really get the effect of the martial art. If the blade's too short, you can cheat yourself and not really ever get a lot of the lessons that you should be learning. And if the blade is too long, it's too cumbersome to use, and you can never successfully do it, which is frustrating. So it's important to get it balanced out at the right size. The next thing would be all of the other questions. Are there colors or sizes or things that you like about a sword that you need? Are you going to be cutting with your sword? If you're going to be cutting, are you going to have one sword for cutting and one sword for practicing? One sword that's lively and one sword that's cumbersome? Is this your only sword? And that will help you determine if you want to find something that balances well in both categories, or if you can have two different swords. One that's easy and nimble to do a lot of repetitive motions with, and one that's big and cumbersome and great at cutting tatami mats. The other thing is budget. Now, there's a road less traveled with martial artists, and that would be very often people either get pigeonholed into buying a really expensive custom sword or an expensive production sword, or just something cheap to start. And something cheap to start is not a bad idea to figure out what you like and what you don't like about a sword. But the road less traveled is buying an inexpensive blade from a company like Huey on eBay or something like that, but a blade that is generally suitable size-wise to your specifications, and then sending it off to somebody that knows what they're doing to mount it in a custom way. The reason is that Chinese blades have come a really long way in the last 20 years in being good and shaped well, and they're not just ugly, stupid crowbars like they might have been in, years past. Huey, for example, can make a really decent shaped blade for, under $200. And then you can take some extra money, set it aside, send it to a custom mounter, and have it mounted so that it assembles properly. All of the gains that the Chinese folks seem to have made in doing well with the blades has not transitioned over to the koshurai, the mount, the assembly, the fit and finish. That part has really been missed over the years and is not at the same level as the blade. If you send it off to somebody, though, that really knows what they're doing in terms of assembly, having a new saya, habaki, suka, all of that stuff made makes it the fit and finish and assembly really sing well, and that is extremely important as a martial artist. You're going to be drawing and resheathing the blade, chances are, very frequently, and if it is a custom mounted blade, you will benefit from that more than any of the other buyer categories that I can think of, because you're going to be doing it so much. Subsequently, most martial arts kind of go hand in hand with the sword. The sword is assembled and fit and finished in a certain way, and the martial arts work with that. The reason that you have to do certain things with your thumb to push the sword out is because the habaki grabs it, and the reason that you hold the blade in a certain way is because this and that, and the reason you check to make sure your kashira is still on there at the end or do certain motions with certain martial arts is because the sword is fit in a certain way. And if you get one that's made in China that the mount is subpar, some of the motions that you're doing in martial arts can really be lost on you. You don't get the full effect of it. So cheap sword and a really nice custom mount to the tune of, you're going to spend $1,000, spend $100 on the blade and $900 in the assembly and mount. I'd say that that's a really solid option if your primary focus is going to be iaido or the drawing and sheathing of the blade. It still could certainly cut well as well. Okay, the next bit that I have for you is the person that intends on using it, but not necessarily for martial arts. So in this case, you're not limited by a restricted rule of here's what you should or shouldn't get. And so in this case, it's really up to you. Are aesthetics important? I mentioned folded steel earlier doesn't really have any great effect on performance, but aesthetically it's very pleasing. Is that important to you? Performance-wise, what are you looking for? What are you going to cut? If it's simple water bottles stacked on top of each other or individual sheets of paper for trick cutting, then you probably want something more lively, easy to control, easy to sharpen, something light, small, probably under 1 pound, or at least maybe 1.5 pounds. And if that's the case, you want something light, quick, breezy. There's a lot of pieces from Munetoshi. Maybe you could even sharpen a Practical Pro to get down to that little nubbin section. Or are you going to do a lot of hard target cutting? Are you going to beat it against cinder blocks? What are you going to do with it? If you want that, maybe a through-hardened Rodin Dojo Pro would be a good idea if you're on the inexpensive side, or some fancy custom sword if you're going to be doing something else. But what you're going to be cutting is going to depend on the sword that you want. Maybe you're going to be doing a little bit of both. So you want something that can kind of play in either space, maybe not excel at either one, but the Hanwei Bushido, for example, is a great one that can be used for drawing practice as well as heavy target cutting, and it's light enough to do some trick cutting, but not really going to excel at any of those categories, but still a very balanced sword. What's your budget? If you have thousands of dollars to spend, doing an antique or a modern custom ideally would probably be in your best bet. You intend on using it. A monosteel custom sword from somebody like Rick Barrett or Howard Clark is really just amazing. You get the best fit, best finish, modern steel, super strong. That would be great, but those are, often $5,000-$6,000. By contrast, if you want something that's just functional to play with in the backyard, the Hanwei Practical XL is usually around $200 and is a great tatami cutter and a pretty resilient sword. So what you're going to be cutting is going to be really important, and your budget is going to be important, and really what you like in a sword is going to be important. Doesn't need to be folded, doesn't need to be laminated, doesn't need to have custom handmade stuff. All of that stuff is going to be important, and you're the one that can answer the question on that stuff. The next group of folks is collectors. Now, collectors, when I think of collectors, I think of people that are amassing a pile of stuff, which you may see in the background here, but also I think of people that want to invest in an item for later resale. And if that's the case, really antiques are about your only bet. Modern production swords don't gain in value. Very often, if you buy a sword from Hanwei and want to resell it, it's worth half of what you paid or less, sometimes a bit more depending on the day. If you buy a custom sword and the smith is still living, as kind of morbid as that sounds, I have some Howard Clark and Rick Barrett swords on the stand back there, but people aren't going to pay me what it costs to build a new one, at least at the same amount, because they can go and commission those smiths to build them one themselves. So you do find that there's an uptick in terms of value. Say Bob Ignath, a well-respected smith, a very talented guy, and somebody who is admired by his peers, who passed away some years ago. He used to make swords for around $300 unmounted, and now those blades would be worth more. Not millions of dollars, not maybe in the low $1,000 range, maybe a little bit more, but it's kind of morbid to bank on a very talented smith dying for it to be worth more. I guess that's just how art works, but it's not really going to be worth your investment if that's what you're after. Antiques are really where you would want to set your focus, and I honestly don't have a ton of advice on you or for you there, other than maybe look at some of the places like Nihonto US, do a lot of reading, figure out what's worth investment, what's going to gain in value over time, and put your money there. If you're just collecting the things that you like to look at or a particular series, you likely have a very specific set of reasons that you're collecting it, either color or brand or something like that, and buy what you like, man. If you're not going to use it, it's going to sit on a wall and it gives you personal enjoyment as home decor. Much respect. I've got some swords hanging on my wall as well, but ultimately I don't have a lot of advice because I can't tell you what you like. You know that already. Buy what you like, spend your money on it, but I would say that there are swords that have some benefits and contrasts and quality, and really look at YouTube, look at reviews, look at high resolution photos and see if they give you or can meet the reasons or promises that they've given you online as advertising through some of the reviews that you see on YouTube or on Sword Buyer's Guide or Swordform International or that you might see on Facebook. I often find that custom swords are still a value to collectors because they look cool and they can demonstrate some really awesome stuff, and just because they're not necessarily going to gain in value doesn't mean they're not collectible. So this is kind of an empty bit of speech that I have for you on my soapbox right now, because if you're not doing it for an investment, really you're buying it for whatever reason you like. And what am I going to say about that? Buy what you like, and I hope you enjoy it. The last group of folks that I can talk about would be the people that ask me about what sword would I want for the zombie apocalypse? What sword is the best for home defense? What sword should I have in case shit hits the fan? Damn it. And the thing I can say about that is it's tough for me to say. There's some caveats that I put in my mind. So one, in this, I'm assuming that one, you're not practicing with it regularly. Two, I'm assuming you want it to be battle tested, know that it's going to work, but that you're not going to invest a lot of time. Three, I don't assume that it has to be super pretty, but maybe you buy it based on looks, or you don't want it to look like a piece of garbage as well. And four, what you're asking me ultimately is, if your life is on the line, what's good? What do you really have a lot of faith in? And that's a tricky question. So with that stuff in mind, I have to keep in mind that if you're not training with it, you're not used to it, really you're talking about what tool, and this is something that maybe is intangible, but I mean, I can say a lot of swords are good, that they do this or that or the other, but there's not a lot of swords that I've picked up and have immediately felt like an extension of my hand, right? If you're not training with it, you're not in a system of martial arts, you're not picking it up, you're not doing drills with it, you need to be able to pick this weapon up and immediately feel like you can hit the thing you're aiming at. And two, that you feel like you could really mess something up with it, right? That this thing that you're picking up is just immediately a damage-dealing, ass-kicking piece of steel that is going to forgive you when you miss and whack into a door jamb or a pole, or hit a cell phone on somebody's hip or something, and at the same time is going to be nimble and easy for you to manipulate and move around. And there are not a lot of swords that feel that way. Frankly, katanas in general don't feel that way to me. I don't pick up a katana and think, this is really easy to manipulate and I could totally do damage with this thing without any instruction or knowing what I'm doing. That's not the impression I get. I've had some, the ones that come to mind in terms of just immediately feeling great to me. I had a Walter Sorrells wakizashi, a custom wakizashi that just felt like a tool in my hand, like something I didn't need to study, that just felt like it would move through targets. The John Ledemo Gununting that I did a custom project on, that one just feels nimble and easy peasy to manipulate. It feels like I could really do some stuff with that and not really need to know what I'm doing. It just feels like I could pick it up and go to town. There was also I can't remember, it's a German style sword with a ring grip on it, but it was a custom piece by Tom Kinder. Hope I'm saying your name right, brother, but a custom piece. It was an Angus trim, I think type 10 blade, double-edged, done up in a German style, single-handed arming sword style piece, and it just felt like you could pick this up, not have any idea what you're doing, and just really go to town, really, really mess stuff up. But any of those three kind of just immediately felt like extensions of my arm, and that's a rare thing. You have to test a lot of swords to feel that, and when you find it, don't give it up easily. I gave up two of those three blades, and I kind of missed them both. Anyway, that's a rarity. There are other things though that you have to consider, and that is that you might be whacking it into stuff accidentally. So having a blade that's really resilient is also important. You get that resilience from a custom-made blade, though custom-made blades are often balanced to feel a particular way for somebody that kind of knows what they're doing. They're not terribly forgiving for whacking them into steel poles. So getting overbuilt blades is also not a bad idea, and there are a few. I've done some stuff with the Ronin Dojo Pro Series where I've split logs with it and whacked it into rocks and chucked 80-pound bricks at it, and they've held up to that and still stayed in a sword shape. So for resilience, there's one of those. Those have proven to me that they stand the test of being beaten against things, which would be important, again, if you're not practicing and you're going to flail it wildly without any sense of really knowing what you're doing, which comes with practicing a martial art and using that blade regularly. There's also the zombie tools. They are a bit overbuilt, but I had the pleasure of testing the zombie tools, Zakuzashi or the Wakizashi style piece, and for what it felt very nimble despite being very hefty and overbuilt. So either of those two manufacturers seem to be pretty good on the, I make a solid, good sword that could be whacked into stuff and flailed around almost uncontrollably in a fit of panic and simultaneously still stay in a sword shape. Some of the really high-end swords that you'll buy, made from Tamahagane and special thises and that's, if you whack them into a steel beam or a door jamb or have a bad cut, it's very probable they'll bend at a 90-degree angle and you will not end up with a sword in your hand. So having something that's really durable is one important aspect, and the other aspect is having something that immediately feels like an extension of your hand. So if I could make any really forward recommendation, it would probably be a through-hardened blade, something that is balanced with a really a balance point that's pretty close to the handle because it gives a tendency to feel more nimble. Not a requirement, but those have been, the shorter blades have felt more nimble and agile to me, and the point of balance has been much closer to the handle. And something that is just, in general, a custom-made blade, so that, I have a lot of faith that if an individual smith put time and energy into it, that it doesn't have a fatal flaw. So the blade I had from Tom Kinder, Walter Sorrells, all felt like that. John Demo. I've even had some angel swords that felt really nimble and nice in the hand. I don't necessarily know that I would use one of those because they're usually a little bit longer. I haven't ever picked one up and been like, this is an immediate extension of my hand, but very often they have a balance point that's much lower than their fellow sword folks out there. So they tend to feel very, very nimble and nice. So one of those would probably be the general direction that I would go. I know I said angel sword, and many of you will poo-poo that, so hopefully some of the other options that I gave you will give you some directions to go, but those would probably be the oh crap buttons that I would have. And I'd really say that if you want something in earnest that you would be willing to put your life on the line for, I'd recommend holding it or training with it, but see what swords you can handle yourself that you pick up and give you that kind of magical sensation that you don't need to know anything about how to use this particular style of blade, and that you could just mess stuff up with it right away because it feels immediately like an extension of your arm. So that's the best advice that I could give you in that category, and there isn't one blade for that. Everyone's body type is different. Everyone moves a little differently. I would just say test it, but I was pretty happy with the zombie tools. The Ronin katana pieces were a bit heavy but very durable, and then I mentioned 3 custom smiths that really blew me away with shorter swords that I felt nimble and amazing with. So anyway, that's what I have for you. I hope this long, crazy, rambly rant has been beneficial. And as always, cheers, and thanks for watching. Can you watch a movie instead? Or you have to go. Honey, I don't want you to go, but you gotta go if you're gonna do that. You understand? Geometry. What else was I talking about? Shot! Bah. Geometry and steels and train of thought. Okay.